The first thing I want you to understand is that I wasn't home when the message appeared. I was standing in the parking lot of a veterinary clinic in Meridian, Mississippi, holding a cardboard carrier with a three-legged cat inside it. And my phone was in the cup holder of my truck because I'd left it there on purpose. I'd left it there because my ex-wife had been texting me about the house, about the equity split, about the water heater she said I'd promised to replace before I moved out. And I did not want to read another word from anyone for at least 45 minutes. So I missed it. I missed the alert that went out to every phone, every tablet, every laptop, every smart television, every gas station pump screen, every hospital monitor, every billboard with a digital face, every checkout register in every grocery store from Biloxi to Bangor. I missed it because I was trying to calm down a feral rescue cat named Duchess, who had a gum infection and a disposition like a cornered wolverine. And because my phone was 60 feet away in a sun-heated cab. And because I had decided, for just a little while, to not be reachable. My name is Harlan Creel. I'm 53 years old. I run a small trap-neuter return operation out of my garage in Meridian, which sounds like a charity, but is really just me, a set of humane traps, a relationship with Dr. Anaya Shah at the Southgate Veterinary Clinic, and a network of people who call me when there's a colony problem. I'm not a veterinarian. I'm not a wildlife biologist. I used to install commercial flooring for 22 years, epoxy and polished concrete mostly, until my knees gave their formal resignation and I started collecting disability and doing this instead. I live alone. I drive a 2011 Tacoma with a camper shell. I have no social media accounts. I read paperback westerns. I eat at the same Chinese buffet every Thursday. I am not, by any reasonable measure, the kind of person you'd expect to be telling this story. But the message didn't care who was reasonable. The message didn't care who was ready. Dr. Shah came out the side door of the clinic at 3:47 p.m., and she wasn't walking the way she normally walked. She normally walked like someone late to something she was looking forward to. Quick steps, slight lean forward, already smiling. This time she came out with her phone in both hands, held at sternum height, the way you hold something that just bit you, and you're not sure if it's going to do it again. "Harlan," she said, "did you see this?" "See what?" She turned the phone toward me. The screen showed a single block of white text on a black background. No header, no agency seal, no timestamp. It read, "A coordinated atmospheric release has been confirmed across multiple North American population centers. This is not a test. Exposure may already be in progress. Further guidance is pending." No sound had accompanied it. No siren, no vibration. It had simply appeared, she said, mid-sentence while she was dictating notes on a Labrador's blood work. Every screen in the clinic had displayed it simultaneously. The desktop in the front office, the tablet on the exam table, her phone, the television in the waiting room that had been playing a muted rerun of some cooking competition. All at once, all silent, all showing the same 19 words and one sentence of emptiness that followed them. "Further guidance is pending." "That's a hell of a thing," I said, because I'm not eloquent under pressure and never have been. She stared at me like I'd just commented on the weather during a funeral. "Harlan, atmospheric release. Multiple population centers." I read it. "What does that mean?" "I don't know. Chemical, biological?" "It doesn't say." "It doesn't say anything. That's the problem." She was right. That was the problem. And the problem metastasized faster than either of us could follow. Because within 10 minutes, the parking lot started filling with people who had been driving past on Highway 19 and pulled over because they didn't know what else to do. A woman in scrubs from the urgent care across the road came running over and asked Dr. Shah if the clinic had sealed ventilation. A man in a pest control uniform sat on the tailgate of his truck and called his wife 4 times and got voicemail each try. I went and got my phone. The message was there, glowing on the lock screen. I pressed it and nothing happened. No link, no expansion, no dismissal option. I swiped and it stayed. I tried to screenshot it and the phone allowed the screenshot, which seemed important somehow, though I couldn't have told you why. No sender, no agency identification, no way to reply, no way to dismiss. Just that message, sitting on every screen like a stain that wouldn't wipe off. Duchess hissed in her carrier. At least one of us was responding proportionally. I need to tell you what Meridian is like, so you understand what happened next. It's a town of about 35,000 in eastern Mississippi, built where 2 rail lines cross, which used to mean something and now mostly means there are train horns at inconvenient hours and a museum nobody from here visits. The economy is military adjacent. There's Naval Air Station Meridian to the north, which trains jet pilots. And there's the distribution and service sector that feeds off the base. It's hot 9 months of the year. The soil is red clay. The pines are tall and close and give the whole landscape a feeling of partial concealment, like the land is always holding something behind its back. It's the kind of place where you know your mail carrier's first name and which church your mechanic goes to, and where a certain percentage of the population has a generator, a chest freezer full of deer meat, and opinions about federal overreach that they will share with you at length if you make eye contact at the gas station. What I'm telling you is that Meridian is a place with a high baseline level of self-sufficiency and a low baseline level of trust in centralized authority. And when a message with no source, no explanation, and no follow-up appeared on every screen in town, those 2 qualities crashed into each other, like freight trains on the same track. By 5 o'clock, Dr. Shah and I were inside the clinic with the doors locked. Not because we decided to shelter, because the parking lot had gotten strange. Not violent, strange. People had started doing things. A man in a Nissan Altima had sealed his windows with packing tape he'd gotten from somewhere and was sitting inside with the engine running and the AC on recirculate. A woman had walked into the pet supply store next door and come out with a bag of activated charcoal, the kind meant for aquarium filters, and was pouring it into a bandana and tying it over her face. Someone had called the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office and been told that they were aware of the alert and awaiting guidance, which was exactly the kind of sentence that makes people feel less safe, not more. Dr. Shah's clinic had a staff of 3. Herself, a vet tech named Ruben Garza, who'd already gone home for the day, and a receptionist, Corinne, who was 19, and looked like she was going to cry, but hadn't yet, and seemed to be holding it together through sheer administrative instinct, because she kept straightening the pamphlets on the front desk like neatness might constitute a plan. "The ventilation here isn't sealed," Dr. Shah said, answering her own question from earlier. "It's a standard HVAC unit with a MER V8 filter. If it's aerosolized particulate, that's nothing. If it's gas phase, that's less than nothing. Do we know it's airborne? It said atmospheric release. What else would it be?" I didn't have an answer. I stood at the front window and watched the parking lot. 3 more cars had pulled in. People were on their phones, but the strange thing, the first truly strange thing I noticed, was that nobody was talking to each other. They were all talking to their phones, calling people who weren't here, searching for information that didn't exist yet, performing a kind of frantic communion with the device that had delivered the warning, as if it might also deliver the interpretation. At 5:22 p.m., the internet went down. Not in a dramatic way, not with an error message. The pages simply stopped loading. Dr. Shah's clinic Wi-Fi showed connected, full signal, but every site returned nothing. My phone's cellular data did the same. The icon showed LTE, but nothing moved. The connection was there. The information was not. "Cellular's out too," I said. "Calls?" I tried. The call connected, rang twice, then dropped to a fast, busy signal. I tried again. Same result. Dr. Shah tried her husband Nikhil, who worked at the PV electronics plant on the north side. Same. "That's not congestion," she said quietly. "Congestion gives you a busy signal or a fail to connect. This connects and then terminates." She was right. And that distinction mattered in ways that would take me days to fully understand. Because congestion means too many people trying to use the system. Termination means someone, or something, has decided the system is done being used. The alert stayed on every screen. Nothing else came through. Corinne finally did cry, very quietly, at her desk, then stopped and said, "I'm sorry," and Dr. Shah said, "Don't apologize for that." And I said nothing because I was watching the man in the Nissan Altima, and his packing tape was starting to peel in the heat. I drove home at 6:15. The streets were wrong. Not empty, not full. Wrong in composition. There were too many cars in some driveways and not enough in others. People were moving supplies from vehicles to houses with a speed that looked purposeful but aimless. Carrier-out stuffing bags, cases of water, bins of something, moving in and out of front doors with the particular urgency of people who are performing preparation without a target. What are you preparing for when you don't know what's coming? You prepare for everything, which means you prepare for nothing. But the motion itself keeps the panic at a manageable frequency. I passed the Walmart on Highway 19, and the lot was full, and there was a Lauderdale County Sheriff's deputy standing near the entrance doing absolutely nothing useful that I could identify. Two people were arguing next to a shopping cart piled with bottled water and what appeared to be every roll of plastic sheeting the store had in stock. At home, I backed the Tacoma into the garage and closed the door. I brought Duchess inside, carrier and all, and set her in the back bedroom I use for post-op recovery cats. There were 3 others in there already. A tabby named Motor, a calico I hadn't named yet, and an elderly orange Tom called Berkeley who had one eye and no particular interest in the apocalypse. I stood in my kitchen. I filled a glass of water from the tap and drank it, then stood there holding the empty glass and looking at the window above the sink. Atmospheric release. I am not a scientist. I am not a prepper, though I own the things a practical rural person owns. A generator, fuel, canned goods, a .30-30 lever action I've had since I was 17, a water filter I bought during a boil notice 3 years ago. I have no gas masks. I have no sealed room. I have no plan for chemical or biological attack because I have always, if I'm being honest, assumed that if something like that happened, people like me in places like Meridian would simply be afterthoughts too small to target, too far from anything to matter. But the message had come to every screen. Not just New York, not just Washington. Every screen. I turned on the television. The alert was there, the same text overlaid on every channel. I could see the ghost of a Fox News broadcast behind it, the crawl still moving underneath. But the alert sat on top like a transparency. I couldn't change it. I couldn't mute it because it had no sound. I turned the TV off. I made a decision in that kitchen that I want to be honest about, because it's the kind of decision that sounds simple and wasn't. I decided to seal the house, not because I had the right materials or the right knowledge, but because doing something directional felt more survivable than doing nothing. I got the roll of 6 mil poly sheeting I keep for covering furniture during pest treatments. I got a roll of contractor's tape. I started with the bedroom where the cats were, sealed the window frame, sealed the closet vent, taped the gap under the door. I moved to the kitchen, sealed the window over the sink, taped the vent above the stove. I turned off the HVAC system entirely because whatever was outside, I didn't want it pulled in and circulated. The house got warm fast. Mississippi in July with no air conditioning is not a choice you make casually. Within an hour, the temperature inside was 87 degrees and climbing. The cats were panting. I was sweating through my shirt. But the house was sealed. Crudely, imperfectly, but sealed. And I sat on the couch in the living room with the lights off and waited for further guidance that I was increasingly sure was not coming. At 8:40 p.m., someone knocked on my front door. I didn't answer immediately. I went to the window next to the door and looked through the gap between the frame and the poly sheeting I'd taped over it. It was Ruben Garza, Dr. Shah's vet tech. He was 31, stocky, with a shaved head and a tattoo of a compass rose on his forearm that he said was ironic because he got lost constantly. He was holding a backpack in one hand and a 12-gauge pump action in the other, muzzle down, finger off the trigger, held with the ease of someone who'd grown up with shotguns, the way other kids grew up with bicycles. "Harlan," he said, "my apartment complex is losing its mind. Can I come in? I sealed the house." "I see that. There's tape on your mailbox." I was thorough. "Can I come in anyway?" I peeled back the tape on the front door, let him in, and resealed it. He told me what was happening at his apartment complex on 8th Street. People had broken into the maintenance closet looking for duct tape and plastic sheeting. 2 families were arguing over whether the vents should be blocked or left open for oxygen flow. A man on the 3rd floor had fired a handgun into the ceiling and then apologized and said he thought he'd heard something on the roof. "Dr. Shah?" I asked. "She went home to Nikhil. She said she'd try to reach the hospital, find out if they know anything." "Phone still down?" "Everything's down. Internet, cellular, landline. I tried the payphone at the Chevron on 7th just to see. Dead." We sat in my dark, hot living room and listened to the nothing that had replaced all communication. Through the sealed windows, I could hear dogs barking, a car alarm going off and not being silenced. And once, far away, what might have been a siren but cut off after 3 seconds and didn't return. "You got water?" Ruben asked. "Tap's still running. I filled every pot and container I owned before I sealed up." Smart. I don't know if it's smart. I don't know what any of this is. He leaned the shotgun against the wall by the door, carefully, and sat on the floor because the couch was too hot. "Nobody does," he said. "That's the whole thing." The next morning. And I want to be precise here, because time became important in ways I didn't expect. At 6:15 a.m. on what I will call day 2, I peeled a corner of the poly sheeting off the kitchen window and looked outside. The air looked normal. The sky was the pale, heat-blanched blue that July gives Mississippi, already bright, already promising temperatures that would make my sealed house genuinely dangerous by noon. The pine trees at the edge of my yard were still. A mockingbird was going through its whole repertoire on the power line. Nothing in the visual field suggested catastrophe. But the neighborhood was different. The Hendersons across the street had taped white sheets of paper in every window. I couldn't read them from my kitchen. The Davila's house 2 doors down had both vehicles gone. The Patel family on the corner had set up what appeared to be a tarp shelter in their detached garage, and I could see extension cords running from the house. Mr. Waverly, who was 81 and lived alone next door, had not appeared at all, which worried me because Mr. Waverly sat on his front porch every morning at 5:30 a.m. with a cup of coffee regardless of weather, season, or the apparent collapse of civilization. "We should check on him," I said. Ruben was feeding the cats. He'd taken over the morning routine without being asked, and the cats had accepted him with the pragmatic flexibility that cats reserve for people who smell like veterinary clinics and carry treats. He looked up from the dish he was filling for Berkeley. The old man next door? Frank Waverly. He's got a pacemaker and a prescription list longer than my arm. If we open the door, we break the seal. I know. This was the first real decision, and I need to sit with it for a moment so you understand the weight. We had sealed the house based on no specific knowledge of what we were sealing against. We had no confirmation that the air was contaminated. We had no confirmation that it wasn't. The alert said atmospheric release. The alert said exposure may already be in progress. The alert said nothing else. Every action from that point forward was a gamble placed against incomplete information, and the stakes were either nothing or everything, with no way to determine which. I unsealed the front door. The outside air hit me. Hot, humid, smelling of cut grass and pine resin, and the faint diesel undertone that Meridian always carries from the train yard. It smelled like Tuesday. It smelled like every summer morning I'd experienced in 23 years of living in this town. I walked across the yard to Frank Waverly's front door and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder, and called his name. I tried the door. It was unlocked, which was normal for Frank, who had never locked his door in the 40 years he'd lived there and considered the practice a symptom of moral decline. He was in his recliner in the living room, and he was alive, and he was furious. "My television won't work," he said, "and my phone won't work, and the air conditioning is making a sound." What kind of sound? A dying sound. His AC unit was a window model from what appeared to be the Reagan administration, and it was indeed making a sound. A grinding, cyclic moan that suggested the compressor was failing. In a normal week, I'd have helped him call a repair service, or driven him to Walmart for a new unit. In this week, the sound was academic, because the question of whether his air was being filtered was more immediately relevant than whether it was being cooled. "Frank, did you see the alert?" "I saw it. It's still on my TV. I can't get rid of it." "Have you sealed your windows?" "Sealed my windows." "With what?" "Why?" I explained. He listened with the particular expression of a man who has survived the Korean War, 2 wives, prostate cancer, and a hip replacement, and is deciding whether this new thing ranks above or below any of them. He decided it ranked below. If they sprayed something in the air and I'm still breathing it, I've been breathing it all night with the windows open, he said. Sealing up now is like putting on a seatbelt after you've already gone through the windshield. He wasn't wrong. And his logic exposed the fracture in mine. If the contamination was real and airborne, and had been released before the alert, then everyone had already been exposed. Sealing up afterward was a psychological exercise, not a practical one, unless the release was ongoing, unless it was staged, unless the concentration mattered and reducing further exposure was meaningful. I didn't know. I still don't know entirely, and I've had 14 months to think about it. I brought Frank back to my house. He came reluctantly, carrying a paper bag containing his medications, a transistor radio that hadn't pulled a signal since the night before, and a framed photograph of his second wife, Dolores, that he placed on my kitchen counter without explanation or apology. Reuben gave him water and a camp chair, and Frank sat in it and told us that in Korea, when they thought they were being gassed, they urinated on cloth and held it over their faces, and he wanted us to know that he was not willing to do that again at his age. By noon, the temperature inside the house had reached 94 degrees. I made the second major decision. I unsealed the windows and turned the HVAC back on, running only the fan, no compressor, to circulate air through the MER V11 filter I'd installed 2 years prior. It wasn't a HEPA filter. It wasn't a gas phase filter. It was a residential furnace filter rated to catch pollen and medium-grade dust. Against a genuine chemical or biological agent, it was approximately as useful as a screen door on a submarine. But it moved air, and air moving through any filter was better than 4 people and 4 cats suffocating in a sealed box. That afternoon, I walked to the Hendersons' house to read the papers in their windows. They were Bible verses, Revelation 16:1, Revelation 8:10-11, Revelation 9:2. The angel poured out his bowl on the earth, and ugly and painful sores appeared on the people who had the mark of the beast. I went home and didn't tell Frank about the Bible verses because he didn't need that information, and neither did I. On day 3, Dr. Shah arrived at my house on foot. She had walked 4.5 miles from her home in the Northgate subdivision because her car was blocked in the driveway by a neighbor's truck that had been parked diagonally across the street as part of an improvised barricade. Her neighborhood, she said, had decided to establish a perimeter. They had blocked every entrance to the subdivision with vehicles, and a rotation of residents with firearms was standing watch at each one. And they had voted on this without her input while she was inside trying to reach the hospital by shortwave. Voted, Reuben said. Raised hands in the cul-de-sac. Majority rules. Kevin Pressman organized it. He has a list. A list of what? Residents. Who's in, who's out. Who has supplies, who doesn't. Who's been outside the perimeter and might be, his word, compromised. She said the word with surgical precision, and I watched her face as she said it. Dr. Anaya Shah was 44 years old, born in Starkville, trained at Mississippi State for undergrad, and Tuskegee for veterinary school. She had dark hair cut short for practical reasons, a small scar on her chin from a dog bite in her second year of practice, and the particular steadiness of someone who had spent 2 decades making life and death decisions about creatures who could not advocate for themselves. She was the calmest person I knew, and she was not calm now. Nikhil, I asked. He's fine. He stayed at the house. He thinks the barricade is reasonable. Do you? I think Kevin Pressman has been waiting his entire life for permission to make a list, and he just got it. She sat at my kitchen table and drank 2 full glasses of water without stopping. She told me what she'd learned from her shortwave radio before she left. She had a Baofeng UV-5R, a cheap handheld unit with limited range, but she'd been scanning frequencies since the night of the alert. Most were silent. Commercial radio was off the air. Not static, but carrier waves with no content, as if the stations were still powered but unmanned or silenced. She'd found one signal, faint on a ham frequency, 146.520 megahertz, the national simplex calling frequency, and it was a man's voice, repeating from somewhere she estimated was within 100 miles, saying the same thing every 90 seconds. Do not shelter in sealed buildings. Repeat, do not shelter. The compound requires open-air dilution. Sealing concentrates exposure. Keep moving. Keep breathing moving air. Do not shelter. I sat down. Who is he? He didn't identify. The transmission quality was poor. He sounded like he was reading. Compound. That's what he said. Did he say what compound? No. We sat with that. The idea that sealing a building, the thing most people in Meridian had spent the last 36 hours doing, might be the worst possible response. That the instinct to hide, to close, to seal, to barricade, was precisely the behavior that maximized harm. That the people in the subdivisions with their plastic sheeting and their duct tape and their voted-on perimeters might be building their own gas chambers with the best of intentions. We can't verify it, Reuben said. No. It could be anyone. It could be wrong. It could be intentionally wrong. Yes, But if it's right, Dr. Shaw said, then every sealed house in this city is a problem. Frank Waverly had been listening from his camp chair. He hadn't spoken in several hours, which was unusual for a man who generally delivered a running commentary on everything from squirrel behavior to congressional dysfunction. He spoke now. When I was in Korea, he said, the Chinese used loudspeakers. They'd broadcast in English. They'd say your unit's name. They'd say you were surrounded. They'd say to surrender, and you'd be treated well. Half the time it was true. Half the time it wasn't. And we could never tell which half we were in. He looked at me with eyes that had seen enough confusion to last several lifetimes, and said, the only thing worse than not knowing is two people telling you different things. He was right. And that was the architecture of the next 2 weeks. Not a single clear threat, but a multiplication of incompatible instructions from sources that could not be verified. Each one reasonable enough to follow and dangerous enough to kill you if wrong. I'm going to compress time here because the days between day 4 and day 12 had a rhythm, and the rhythm is more important than the individual days. Each morning I checked on Frank's medications. He took 11 pills daily, 2 for blood pressure, 1 blood thinner, 1 for the pacemaker rhythm, a statin, a proton pump inhibitor, 2 for arthritis, 1 for what he called the plumbing, 1 multivitamin he swore by despite my skepticism, and a baby aspirin. He had arrived with a 14-day supply. We both understood the arithmetic. Each morning, Dr. Shaw scanned frequencies on the Baofeng. The open-air message continued on 146.520. Same voice, same script. On day 5, a second voice appeared on a different frequency, 147.000. And it said the opposite. Shelter immediately. Seal all openings. The compound was heavier than air and would settle into low-lying areas. Basements and ground floors were the most dangerous. Go high. Go sealed. Go still. This voice identified as a retired Army chemical officer from Hattiesburg. He sounded credible. He sounded certain. He directly contradicted the first voice, and both of them were broadcasting into a city that had no way to distinguish truth from confident error. Each morning, Reuben made rounds. He'd go on foot through our section of the neighborhood, a half-mile loop of residential streets east of Highway 19, and check on people. Not heroically, not with a plan. He'd knock on doors and ask if people were okay and if they needed water. He carried the shotgun because twice in the first 3 days, someone had fired shots in the distance, and because a man on Poplar Street had threatened him with a hunting knife for approaching his porch. Reuben had simply raised his hands and walked backward and never went to that house again. Each morning, I fed the cats. This sounds trivial, and I know it sounds trivial. And I'm telling you about it because it wasn't. I had 60 pounds of dry cat food in the garage, which sounds like a lot until you calculate 4 cats eating roughly a cup per day and realize it's enough for approximately 240 days, which was the first math I did that actually made me feel better about anything. The cats did not care about atmospheric release. They did not care about compound dilution rates or sealed buildings or Kevin Pressman's lists. They cared about food at 6 a.m. and a clean litter box, and the patch of sun that moved across the back bedroom floor between 2 and 4 p.m. Their complete indifference to the crisis was, in a way I cannot fully explain, the most stabilizing force in that house. Berkeley, the one-eyed orange Tom, would sit on the windowsill each afternoon and watch the street with his remaining eye, and I would sit next to him and watch the same street. And we had roughly the same amount of useful intelligence about what was happening. On day 6, the water pressure dropped. Not out. Dropped. The taps ran at maybe 40% of normal flow. I filled every container again. Pots, pitchers, the bathtub, 2 5-gallon buckets from the garage. The Berkey filter I owned could process about 3.5 gallons per day with the 2 black Berkey elements I had. 4 people consuming a minimum of a ½ gallon each per day in Mississippi heat meant 2 gallons daily just for drinking, not counting cooking or hygiene. The math was tight but survivable as long as the taps didn't stop entirely. On day 8, they stopped entirely. No announcement, no pressure decrease, just dry pipes. I turned on the kitchen tap at 7 a.m. and it coughed once and produced a tablespoon of rust-colored water and then nothing. We had the bathtub, which I estimated at 40 gallons. The buckets, another 10. The pots and pitchers, maybe 8. 58 gallons total, unfiltered. Run through the Berkey at 3.5 gallons per day. That was 16 days of drinking water if we rationed and used nothing for anything else. 16 days. Frank said. In Korea, we drank from rice paddies. They'd been fertilized with human waste. Half the platoon got dysentery. The other half got lucky. Frank, that's not encouraging. It wasn't meant to be. On day 9, Dr. Shah made a decision I need to tell you about because it changed the shape of everything that came after. She decided to go back to her clinic. Not for medicine. Veterinary pharmaceuticals are not directly interchangeable with human ones, though there's more overlap than most people realize. And she was acutely aware of this. She went because the clinic had something none of us had. A commercial water supply with a reserve tank. Veterinary clinics use significant water for cleaning, sterilization, and animal care. And the Southgate Clinic had a 500-gallon reserve tank on the roof that fed the surgical suite. If it was still full, if no one had found it or drained it, it represented a water supply that could sustain our group for months. I'll go with you, I said. No, stay with Frank. Ruben can stay with Frank. Ruben doesn't know Frank's medication schedule. I'll write it down. Harlan. She looked at me in a way that was not quite impatient but was adjacent to it. I know every inch of that building. I can be there and back in 3 hours. Let me go. She went, alone, on foot, with the Baofeng radio and a folding knife and no other protection. She was gone for 7 hours. When she came back, she was limping. She had a bruise along her left forearm that extended from wrist to elbow. And she was carrying 2 1-gallon jugs of water and nothing else. What happened? People got there first. The clinic had been broken into. Not looted randomly, but specifically. Someone had forced the back door, gone directly to the pharmaceutical storage, and taken every controlled substance, every antibiotic, and every vial of ketamine in the lockbox. The water tank on the roof had been accessed via the exterior maintenance ladder and drained through the valve. And there were muddy footprints and drag marks suggesting multiple 5-gallon containers had been filled and carried away. The only water she'd found was in the toilet tanks, which she'd drained into the jugs. The arm, Ruben asked. A man on 8th Street. He had a bat. He didn't swing it. He pushed me with it. Told me I couldn't walk through his block. Did you know him? No, he was wearing a respirator. The kind you get at a hardware store with the pink cartridges. He looked terrified. She sat on the kitchen floor, not the chair, on the floor, and leaned her head back against the cabinet. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The streets smell different." Different how? Sweet, faintly sweet, like fermentation or overripe fruit. I noticed it around 12th Street, and it was stronger near the clinic. Ruben and I looked at each other. We both went to the front door and opened it and stood on the porch and breathed. I didn't smell anything sweet. I smelled heat and pine and the faintly sulphurous odor of the paper mill in the distance, which was always there when the wind came from the south. "I don't smell it," I said. "Neither do I," Reuben said. We went back inside and did not say what we were thinking, which was that either the sweet smell was localized to a part of town we hadn't visited, or Dr. Shah was smelling something we couldn't, and both possibilities were terrifying in different ways. Day 11. I need to tell you about day 11 because it was the day the structure of our situation changed from endurance to choice. Frank ran out of his blood pressure medication, both prescriptions, the lisinopril and the amlodipine. He had enough of his other medications for 3 more days, but the blood pressure drugs were gone, and without them, his readings, taken with a manual cuff I'd found in a box in his house, were running 178 over 104. For a man with a pacemaker and a history of 2 minor strokes, those numbers were not abstract. They were a countdown. "There's a Walgreens on 22nd, Reuben said. "You think it's still standing?" "I think it's worth finding out." "I'll go," I said. "Harlan, you're 53 with bad knees. And you're 31 with the only shotgun. If something happens to you, we lose our security and our vet tech. If something happens to you, the cats get sad. The cats will get over it. Frank won't get over a stroke." This was not heroism. I want to be clear about that. This was the math of who was most expendable. And by every useful measure, it was me. Reuben had medical skills. Dr. Shah had medical skills and the radio. Frank was the one who needed saving. I installed floors and caught feral cats. My contribution to the group was spatial. I knew the town. I knew the streets. I knew which alleys connected to which and where the fences had gaps. That knowledge was useful for exactly one thing: moving through a place that had become difficult to move through. I left at 5 a.m. before full light, because I'd noticed that the streets were emptiest in the hour before dawn. People who were barricaded stayed barricaded until daylight confirmed that the world still existed. People who were roaming had generally exhausted themselves by 3 or 4 a.m. The gap between darkness and dawn was a seam, and I intended to thread it. The Walgreens was 1.8 miles from my house. I walked it in 32 minutes, which was slow. My knees registered every step like a personal complaint. But the pace let me observe. The streets were not empty. 2 houses on Sycamore had burned. Not fully. They were charred on one side. The fires apparently started and then abandoned or self-extinguished. A dog was eating something in the road on 14th that I did not look at closely enough to identify and do not intend to describe. The sweet smell Dr. Shah had mentioned was present on 18th Street. And she was right. It was distinct, like fermenting fruit, like something organic breaking down into sugar. And it came and went in pockets, as if the air carried it in streams rather than as a blanket. The Walgreens was intact. The front doors were smashed, glass everywhere, but the structure was standing. I went in through the empty door frame and stood in the dark store and let my eyes adjust. It had been looted, but selectively. The front of the store, candy, snacks, drinks, cosmetics, was destroyed, swept off shelves, trampled. But the pharmacy in the back was behind a steel security gate, and the gate was dented but holding. Whoever had tried to breach it had used something heavy. A fire extinguisher lay on the floor nearby, bloody at the base. But the gate had held. I knew something about commercial security gates because I'd installed flooring in pharmacies. This model was a folding guard standard duty accordion gate, and the lock was a standard cylinder that could be defeated with a drill and a flathead screwdriver in about 4 minutes if you knew where to apply pressure. I did not have a drill. I had a multi-tool with a flathead bit. I had time. It took me 22 minutes. The cylinder gave way with a sound like a tooth cracking, and the gate folded open, and I stepped behind the pharmacy counter for the first time in my life and stood in front of a wall of white bottles with names I mostly couldn't pronounce. I found the lisinopril quickly. It was alphabetical by generic name, right there, multiple bottles. I took 3 bottles of 10 milligrams, which was Frank's dosage. I found amlodipine and took 2 bottles. I stood there with the bottles in my hands and stared at the wall. And this is where the moral question found me, because it had been waiting there the whole time. The wall had everything: antibiotics, amoxicillin, azithromycin, ciprofloxacin, doxycycline, pain management, hydrocodone bottles, tramadol, oxycodone, insulin in the refrigerated case, which was warm now, but the vials were there. Inhalers, EpiPens, metformin, levothyroxine, prednisone, warfarin. Every maintenance medication that every person in Meridian depended on was sitting on this wall, in a store with a broken front door and a pharmacy gate that I had just taught myself to open. I could take what Frank needed and leave. I could take everything and distribute it. I could take everything and hold it. The third option is the one I need to confess. It crossed my mind, not as greed, as leverage. In a world without pharmacies, without supply chains, without doctors' offices, the person holding the medication supply held something very close to political power. I could become necessary. I could become the person people came to. I could become, in the ugliest arithmetic of collapse, important. I stood there for maybe 2 full minutes, and I want you to understand that 2 minutes in a dark pharmacy with the world outside sliding into something unrecognizable is a very long time. My knees ached. My mouth was dry. The sweet smell was faint in here, carried in from outside through the broken doors. I took Frank's medications. I took a bottle of amoxicillin because Dr. Shah had mentioned it as the most broadly useful antibiotic. I took a bottle of ibuprofen because everyone's body hurt. And then I did something that I think, looking back, was either the best or worst decision of those entire weeks. I left the gate open. I left it open, and I left the pharmacy accessible. And I walked out of that Walgreens knowing that within hours, someone else would walk in and find it, and they would take whatever they wanted. And some of those takings would save lives, and some would end them. And I had chosen to make that someone else's decision instead of mine. I was 4 blocks from home when I heard the gunshot from the direction of the Walgreens. A single report, sharp and flat in the morning air. Then nothing. I did not go back. I walked home with the bottles in my jacket pockets, the pills rattling with each step like dry little bones. And I gave Frank his lisinopril, and he took it with 2 ounces of filtered water and said, "Thank you, Harlan." And I said, "You're welcome." And I went into the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub and pressed my palms against my eyes until the pressure made colors bloom in the darkness. Day 14. I need to tell you what had changed in us by then, because the external changes were just scenery. The real deterioration was internal. Reuben had stopped talking in the evenings. During the day, he was functional. He made rounds. He maintained the water filtration schedule. He checked the perimeter of the house. But after dark, he would sit in the corner of the living room with a shotgun across his knees and stare at the floor and say nothing for hours. On day 12, I'd asked him if he was okay, and he'd said, "I keep thinking about my mom in El Paso." And then he'd stopped talking and hadn't resumed. His mother. I hadn't known about her. He had never mentioned her in the 2 years I'd known him through the clinic. And now she existed in my awareness as a woman I couldn't picture, in a city I'd never visited, experiencing her own version of this silence. And there was nothing any of us could do about it. Dr. Shah had developed a cough. It had started on day 10 as a throat-clearing habit, and by day 14 it was a persistent, dry bark that came in clusters of 4 or 5. She attributed it to the dust from the poly sheeting and the reduced air quality inside. She said this with the specific vocal flatness of a medical professional diagnosing herself and refusing to consider the alternatives. When Reuben asked if it could be related to the sweet smell she'd noticed, she said, "I don't know." And that was the first time any of us had heard her say those words about a medical question. And none of us pressed further because the answer we might receive was not one we could afford. Frank was stable. The lisinopril had brought his blood pressure down to 152/94, which was not good but was survivable. And he had resumed his running commentary on squirrels, the weather, and the general incompetence of any government that would send an alert with no follow-up. His commentary was medicinal. I mean that literally. The sound of a human voice narrating the ordinary, assigning normalcy to a morning, cataloging the visible world with the assumption that it was still worth cataloging, was keeping something alive in that house that would have died without it. And me. What was happening to me? I was counting. That's the simplest way to say it. I was counting everything. Gallons of water remaining. 31. Days of cat food, approximately 190. Cans of human food in the pantry, 47. Rounds of .30-30 ammunition, 16. Ibuprofen tablets, 200. Frank's remaining lisinopril, enough for 42 days. Hours of generator fuel, approximately 30, if we ran it only to charge the Baofeng. I was running these numbers in my head constantly, updating them each morning, a rolling inventory of decline. The counting was compulsive, and I knew it was compulsive, and I couldn't stop because the numbers were the only thing that behaved predictably. I was also noticing things about myself that I hadn't expected. I noticed that I had not thought about my ex-wife in 11 days. Not once. Not her name, not the house, not the water heater, not the equity split, not the 21 years of marriage that had ended in a mediation room in Jackson with a woman lawyer who smelled like peppermint and kept calling us both by our first names as if we were friends. The thing that had occupied every spare neuron for 18 months had simply disappeared, replaced by the immediate. And I couldn't decide if that was freedom or just a more pressing cage. I noticed that I cared about these people. Not in the way I had cared about my wife, which was a slow, structural caring, like a load-bearing wall that you don't notice until it's gone. This was different. This was specific and daily and animal. I cared whether Reuben ate breakfast. I cared whether Frank's ankles were swelling. I cared that Dr. Shaw's cough was getting worse. I cared the way you care about a litter of kittens in a crawl space, desperately, uselessly, with the full knowledge that your caring changes nothing about the math of survival, but you cannot stop caring. Because to stop would be to become something you're not willing to become. On the evening of day 14, Dr. Shaw picked up a new transmission on the Baofeng. It was not the open-air voice. It was not the shelter voice. It was a woman. Clear signal. Close. Maybe within the city. She was calm, and she was saying something I will remember for the rest of my life. "This is Dr. Claire Marchetti, board-certified toxicologist, formerly of the CDC Environmental Health Branch in Atlanta. I am broadcasting from Meridian, Mississippi. The atmospheric release was a dispersed organophosphate compound, likely modified from a nerve agent precursor. Symptoms include olfactory distortion, progressive respiratory irritation, and gradual loss of peripheral nerve function. The compound degrades in open air with a half-life of approximately 72 hours. Sealed environments concentrate the compound and accelerate symptom onset. I repeat, do not seal your buildings. If you have sealed, unseal immediately and ventilate. If you are experiencing sweet or fruity phantom smells, you are in an area of residual concentration. Move to higher elevation. I am at the Meridian Community Center on 5th Street. I have limited treatment supplies. If you can reach me, come. The message repeated. Dr. Shah looked at me. Her face held something I'd never seen in it before. Not fear, not relief, but the particular anguish of someone who has been acting on incomplete information and just received the piece that tells them the cost. She had sealed the clinic before she'd left it. She had sealed it carefully, the way I had sealed my house. And if anyone had gone back to shelter in it? We unsealed 5 days ago, I said. We've been running the fan. The fan pulls air through a MERV11 filter. The pore size on a MERV11 is approximately 1 micron. Organophosphate vapor is molecular scale, sub-nanometer. The filter did nothing. But we've been breathing outside air too, through the windows. Yes. And the compound has a 72-hour half-life in open air, which means what was released 12 days ago is at... She closed her eyes and calculated. Less than 3% of its original concentration, if she's right. If she's right. If she's right, and if we trust her, and if the half-life is accurate, and if the initial concentration in Meridian was survivable, then we've been breathing a declining dose for 12 days, and the sealed house period was the most dangerous part. We both looked at Frank, who had been in his house with open windows for the first 36 hours, and at Reuben, who had been in an apartment building with communal ventilation that was never sealed, and at Dr. Shah, who had sealed the clinic and then walked 4 miles through open air, and at me, who had sealed the house and then unsealed it on day 3. Different exposures, different durations, different doses. 4 people in the same house with 4 different internal clocks. Dr. Shah coughed 5 times in succession and then said, "We need to get to that community center." We left at dawn on day 15. All of us, including the cats. I want to explain the cats because people will think it was sentimental, and it wasn't. It was practical in a way that only makes sense if you've cared for animals during a crisis. The cats were in carriers. 4 carriers in the bed of the Tacoma under the camper shell. The truck had sat in the garage for 2 weeks, and the battery was low, but it started on the 3rd try, and I let it idle for 5 minutes while we loaded. Frank sat in the front seat. He was wearing a clean shirt he'd asked me to iron the night before. Iron it, with an actual iron, on day 14 of a crisis, because he said he wasn't going to meet a doctor looking like a refugee. I ironed the shirt. It seemed like a reasonable request. It seemed, in fact, like the most reasonable request anyone had made in 2 weeks. Dr. Shah and Reuben sat in the back seat. The shotgun was between them, muzzle down on the floor. Dr. Shah had the Baofeng in her hand, still scanning. Dr. Marchetti's broadcast was repeating every 4 minutes. The drive to 5th Street should have taken 8 minutes. It took 40. The streets were obstructed, not all of them, and not systematically, but enough that I had to route around barricades, abandoned vehicles, and in one case a section of 7th Street where someone had dug a trench across both lanes. A trench. With a backhoe that was still sitting there, key in the ignition, as if the operator had decided mid-project that the trench was sufficient and walked away. The Meridian Community Center is a flat, ugly, functional building on 5th Street that usually hosts blood drives and city council town halls. As we pulled into the lot, I counted 11 other vehicles already there. People were standing outside, not in a crowd, in clusters separated by 10 or 15 feet, as if proximity itself was a risk they were managing. And There was Dr. Claire Marchetti, standing on the front steps with a folding table and what appeared to be a field medical kit. And she was exactly the kind of person I was hoping she would be and afraid she wouldn't be. She was maybe 60, small, with silver hair pulled back in a knot and wire-rimmed glasses, and the build of someone who had been thin their entire life, not from vanity, but from forgetting to eat. She wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows and cargo pants and boots that had seen actual mud. She had a clipboard. She had a stethoscope. She had, behind her on the table, a row of atropine auto-injectors, the military-grade ones, Mark I kits, and I had enough residual knowledge from my years installing flooring at military facilities to know that those injectors were not something a civilian toxicologist just happened to have. "Who drove?" she asked, looking at our truck. "I did." "Any of you experiencing numbness in the hands or feet?" "No." "Blurred vision?" "No." "Excessive salivation?" "I've been coughing," Dr. Shaw said. Dr. Marchetti looked at her for a long moment. "How long?" "5 days." "Productive?" "Dry." "Onset after sealed environment exposure?" "I sealed my clinic for the first 40 hours. "Come inside." "Doctor." Shaw went in. The rest of us waited. Frank sat in the truck with the door open and his iron shirt catching the morning light, and he looked at the community center and said, "This is where Dolores and I took line dancing classes in 2009. She was terrible at it. She had no sense of rhythm at all. She just liked holding my hand in public with a socially acceptable excuse." He said it to no one in particular. He said it to the morning. Reuben put his hand on the old man's shoulder and left it there, and Frank let him. Dr. Marchetti examined all of us over the next hour. Her assessment was precise and terrifying in its matter-of-factness. The compound. She confirmed it was a modified organophosphate, though she would not say who had released it or why. And I think she knew more than she was willing to broadcast. Had a set of predictable effects at sublethal doses. Olfactory distortion was the first symptom. The sweet smell was the compound itself, registering on receptors it was slowly damaging. Respiratory irritation was second. Peripheral neuropathy, the loss of feeling and control in hands and feet, was third, and it was the one that concerned her most because it was progressive and, past a certain threshold, irreversible. Dr. Shaw's cough was consistent with moderate exposure. "She would recover," Marchetti said, "with treatment. Atropine to counteract the cholinergic effects. Pralidoxime if she could get it, which she could not because her supply was limited to what she'd brought from Atlanta in the trunk of her car. She had 19 atropine auto-injectors remaining. There were now 31 people at the community center. 19 injectors, 31 people. "You're going to have to decide who gets them," Marchetti said to no one and to all of us. "Based on what?" someone asked. A man I didn't know, heavy-set, standing near the door. "Based on exposure severity, symptomatology, likelihood of progression." "How do we know who's sickest?" "I examine everyone. I make a determination." "One person decides?" "I'm the only toxicologist here, so yes." The man stared at her. The group stared at her. The weight of that moment. One woman with 19 needles and 31 people and a clipboard, and the authority that came from nothing except knowing what she was talking about. Settled over the parking lot like the heat. I understood, in that moment, something about authority that I'd never understood before. Authority is not given. It is recognized. And it is recognized fastest by people who are afraid and who encounter someone who is not. Dr. Marchetti was not afraid. She was tired, and she was angry. A low, banked anger that came out in the precision of her language, as if every word was a rebuke to whatever system had released the compound and then gone silent. But she was not afraid. And because she was not afraid, we trusted her, all of us, immediately. With a kind of trust that in normal times takes years to build, and in crisis takes 30 seconds of demonstrated competence. She examined everyone. She triaged. Dr. Shah received the 4th injector. Frank did not need one. His open window exposure had been at a low enough dose, and his symptoms were attributable to his existing conditions. Reuben did not need one. I did not need one. 7 people received injectors that day, 5 more the next. That was 12 of 19. 7 remaining held in reserve for new arrivals or deterioration. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you about the next 3 weeks. And the truth is that they don't lend themselves to the kind of storytelling that the first 2 weeks do. Crisis is narrative. Recovery is not. Crisis has shape. It rises, it peaks, it breaks. Recovery is flat. Recovery is counting pills in the morning and boiling water in the afternoon, and sitting in a circle of folding chairs in a community center that smells like sweat and instant coffee, and listening to Dr. Marchetti explain, for the 4th time, to a new arrival, what the compound is and what it does, and why the sealed houses were the worst thing, and why nobody should blame themselves for doing what seemed logical. The water came back on day 19. Not everywhere. In pockets, in certain neighborhoods, at reduced pressure. We ran the taps at the community center and filled every container we could find and boiled it and drank it, and it tasted like rust and chlorine and civilization. On day 22, a military convoy came through. National Guard, out of Camp Shelby, 4 trucks. They distributed MREs and water and information. The information was the most valuable. The release had affected a corridor from Mobile, Alabama to Memphis, Tennessee, following the prevailing wind pattern from the Gulf. Meridian was near the center of the corridor. The source was not identified. The investigation was ongoing. The word terrorism was used once and then replaced with incident for the rest of the briefing. They brought pralidoxime, enough to treat the moderate exposure cases. Dr. Shah received a full course. Her cough began to improve within 3 days. On day 28, the cell towers came back. Not all of them. Enough. And the first call I received was from my ex-wife, Laura. And she was in Jackson, and she was alive, and she was crying, and she said, "I thought you were dead." And I said, "I'm not?" And she said, "The water heater is fine, Harlan. The water heater is fine. I don't care about the water heater." And I sat on the steps of the community center and listened to her cry. And I did not cry, because I was too tired to cry. But I held the phone against my face, like it was a warm hand. Reuben reached his mother on day 29. She was alive. El Paso had been outside the corridor. She was fine. He sat on the floor of the community center with his back against the wall and talked to her for 41 minutes. And when he hung up, he stood up and went to the makeshift kitchen and started making rice for 60 people. And he whistled while he did it. Not a song, just notes. Just sound that wanted to come out. Frank Waverly did not recover fully. His hands developed a tremor. Fine motor, progressive, related to the peripheral neuropathy that Dr. Marchetti had warned about. He could no longer button his own shirts. He could no longer hold a coffee cup without gripping it with both hands. He bore this with the particular grace of a man who had already lost enough things in his life that the loss of fine motor control registered as an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. On day 35, I drove Frank home. His house was undamaged. His recliner was where he'd left it. The window unit had died permanently, and I installed a new one, a portable unit from the supply distribution point the guard had set up at the fairgrounds. I plugged it in, and it hummed to life, and Frank sat in his recliner and closed his eyes and said, That's the most beautiful sound in the world. I went home. My house smelled like polished sheeting and stale cat litter and the ghost of 2 weeks of fear sweat. I opened every window. I opened both doors. I let the Mississippi air in. Hot, heavy, pine-scented, carrying the distant train horns and the mockingbird and all the ordinary poisons of an ordinary place. The cats resettled immediately. Motor claimed the couch, the calico. I named her Walgreens, because I'd decided she deserved a name, and that was the name that came and took the kitchen windowsill. Berkeley returned to his spot by the living room window and resumed his one-eyed surveillance of the street. I sat on the back porch with a glass of tap water and looked at the yard. The grass was overgrown. The trap-neuter return traps were still stacked against the garage wall. Somewhere in this city, there were feral colonies that had been unmanaged for 5 weeks, which meant litters born, territories expanded. The whole quiet machinery of animal life, continuing its program regardless of what humans had released into the air or failed to say on their screens. I had work to do. That thought, I had work to do, landed in my chest with a weight that I initially mistook for sadness, but was actually something closer to gratitude. Not gratitude for surviving. Gratitude for having something to return to that was small and specific and mine. Something that would not make the news. Something that would not be discussed in briefings or investigations or congressional hearings. Something that was just a man and some traps and some cats who needed help. In a town that was still here, in air that was clearing, one half-life at a time. The community center became something none of us named, because naming it would have meant admitting we needed it. By day 18, there were 43 people sleeping on the floor. Dr. Marchetti had organized the space with the unsentimental efficiency of someone who had done this before. Not this exactly, but something adjacent. Something involving too many bodies and too few resources, and the particular geometry of human need arranged on institutional tile. She divided the main hall into zones. Treatment on the south wall, near the restrooms for water access. Supply storage in the old kitchen behind the serving counter. Sleeping in the center, mats and blankets arranged in rows with 3-foot gaps that she called circulation lanes, and everyone else called aisles. The stage at the East End, where the city council sat during town halls, became her triage desk. She sat up there with her clipboard and her stethoscope and her dwindling row of auto-injectors, and she saw everyone who came through the doors, one at a time, without hurry and without turning anyone away. I want to tell you about a man named Dale Purcell, because he became important, and because he was the first person who made me understand that the crisis was not going to end just because the compound was degrading. Dale was maybe 40, angular, with the deep tan and calloused hands of someone who worked outside. He was a roofer. He'd been on a job in Philadelphia, Mississippi, about an hour northwest, when the alert came and he'd driven back to Meridian to find his house on the south side sealed and empty. His wife and 2 kids had gone somewhere. He didn't know where. The neighbors didn't know, or they knew and wouldn't tell him, because Dale had a reputation. And the reputation involved the police being called to his house twice in the previous year for what the reports called domestic disturbance and what everyone on his street understood as something more specific and uglier. He came to the community center on day 16. He was cooperative, polite, and deeply frightening in a way I couldn't initially articulate. It was his patience. He waited in line. He answered Dr. Marchetti's questions. He accepted his cot assignment without complaint. He helped unload a water delivery from one of the guard trucks. He did everything right, and every person in that building who had any instinct at all watched him the way you watch a dog that's wagging its tail with its ears flat. On day 17, he asked me if I'd seen a woman named Jess Purcell, Brunette, early 30s. 2 girls aged 5 and 7. I haven't, I said. She might come here. If she comes here, will you tell me? If she comes here, she can decide who she wants to talk to. He looked at me. The patience was still there. But underneath it, something moved. The way water moves under ice. You can't see the current, but you can feel the cold radiating off it. She's my wife, he said. I understand that. My kids are with her. I understand that too. He held my gaze for a count of 5. I know because I counted, the way I counted everything. And then he nodded and walked back to his cot and sat down and didn't speak to me again that day. I told Dr. Shah about it that evening. She was sitting on the back steps of the community center, drinking water from a paper cup. Her cough reduced to an occasional clearing that she performed with a hand pressed against her sternum as if checking whether her lungs were still cooperating. I know who he is, she said. Jess brought one of the girls to the clinic once. The girl had a kitten with a broken leg. While I was splinting it, the girl told me her dad breaks things when he's mad and then feels really sorry about it. She was 6. She said it the way you'd describe the weather. He's looking for them. Of course he is. What do? We don't help him find them. If they left for a reason. The crisis doesn't erase the reason. She was right, and the clarity of her statement exposed something I'd been avoiding. The emergency had created a kind of moral fog in which the urgency of survival made every other consideration feel secondary. People needed shelter, water, medicine, information. Those needs were so immediate and so legitimate that they obscured the other kinds of danger, the dangers that had existed before the alert and would continue after the compound cleared. Dale Purcell's need to find his family was real. His family's need to not be found was also real. And in the compressed, resource-scarce, authority-thin environment of the community center, those two needs were going to collide. They collided on day 20. I was sorting donated supplies in the kitchen. Canned goods from the guard distribution mostly, arranged by type because the organization soothed me and because nobody else was going to do it. When I heard the raised voice, it wasn't shouting. It was worse than shouting. It was the controlled, volume-managed fury of a man who has learned that shouting gets the police called and has calibrated his threat delivery to stay just beneath that threshold. Dale was standing at the front entrance talking to a woman I hadn't seen before, mid-20s, short blonde hair, holding a backpack with both arms wrapped around it like a child holds a stuffed animal. She had come in looking for shelter, and Dale had intercepted her at the door and was asking her, telling her about Jess, about the girls. Had she seen them? Did she know where the South Side evacuees had gone? His voice steady and pleasant, and laced with something that made the woman's shoulders climb toward her ears. Reuben got there before I did. He didn't have the shotgun. We'd agreed weapons stayed in the supply closet, secured. A rule Dr. Marchetti had established on day 1 with a simple statement, "I will not treat people in a building where people are armed." And nobody had argued. Reuben was empty-handed and 6 inches shorter than Dale, and he stepped between them with the specific confidence of a man who has handled panicked animals 10 times his strength, and understands that the first rule is to not match the energy. "Hey, Dale, let her in, man. She just got here." "I'm asking a question." "I know. Ask it later. Let her get water first." Dale looked at Reuben. The math happened visibly, the calculation of whether this confrontation was worth the cost. Whether the audience gathering behind Reuben, me, 3 other residents, Dr. Marchetti watching from the stage, constituted enough witness pressure to modify behavior. Dale was not stupid. Dale was strategic in the way that controlling people are strategic, which is to say he understood leverage and timing and the value of appearing reasonable. "Sure," he said. "No problem." He walked away. The woman came in. Her name was Ellie Marsh, and she had been sheltering alone in her apartment on the east side for 18 days, and she was dehydrated and scared, and had a persistent numbness in her left hand that Dr. Marchetti diagnosed as early-stage peripheral neuropathy. She received the 13th atropine injector. That night, Dr. Marchetti called a meeting, not a formal one. She simply stood on the stage and spoke in a voice that carried without effort. And people stopped what they were doing and listened. Because that's what happened when she spoke. "This building is a medical shelter," she said. "It's not a home. It's not a courthouse. It's not a church. It's a place where people come to be safe while they recover. The definition of safe includes physical safety from each other. If anyone in this building is making another person feel unsafe, I need to know about it. I won't arbitrate disputes, I won't take sides, but I will remove anyone whose presence prevents someone else from accessing treatment. That includes me, if it comes to it. Are we clear?" We were clear. Dale sat on his cot with his hands folded in his lap and his face arranged in an expression of total agreement. And I watched him, and I understood that Dr. Marchetti had just drawn a line that he would respect right up until the moment it became inconvenient. And that moment would come when he found out where his wife was. And every day that he didn't find out was a day the pressure built. I started sleeping at the community center instead of going home. I told myself it was because the drive was wasting fuel. The truth was that I didn't trust Dale Purcell after dark. And I didn't trust the situation. And I wanted to be there if the thing that was building behind his patience finally emerged. I brought the cats. All 4 carriers, all 4 cats, arranged in a corner of the kitchen storage area where the tile was cool and the ambient noise was low. Motor immediately claimed a shelf. Walgreens hid behind a case of canned corn. Berkeley sat on the counter and surveyed the room with his one eye and the calico curled up in a sink that wasn't connected to anything. Frank refused to come. "I'm staying in my house," he said. "I've been run out of enough places in my life. I'm not being run out of my recliner by a chemical I can't even smell." I went to his house every morning at 6 a.m. I sorted his pills. He made terrible coffee. The routine was an anchor for both of us. And anchors only work if they stay where you put them. Day 23. This was the day it broke, and I need to tell it carefully, because what happened was both very small and very large. And I was the only one who saw the beginning. I was on the back steps at 4 a.m. Couldn't sleep. The community center at night was a symphony of human sounds. Breathing, coughing, murmuring, the occasional cry from a dream that hadn't gotten the message that the waking world was already bad enough. I'd stepped out for air, and I was sitting on the concrete steps looking at the parking lot when I saw Dale's truck, a white F250 with a ladder rack, pull out of its spot and turn south on 5th Street with the headlights off. I didn't follow him. I couldn't have followed him. My truck was parked on the other side of the building, and by the time I got to it, he'd be gone. But I watched the direction he went, and I noted the time. And I sat on those steps with my bad knees aching against the concrete, and I thought about what I should do. At 7:15 a.m., Dale was back. His truck was in its spot. He was on his cot, eyes closed, appearing to sleep. Nothing about his posture suggested he'd been anywhere. At 8 a.m., Dr. Shah arrived for her morning shift. She'd been coming daily to assist Dr. Marchetti with examinations and treatment. I pulled her aside. Dale left at 4, came back at 7. Where'd he go? South. She was quiet. Then, the school? What school? Meridian South Elementary. The Red Cross set up a secondary shelter there. Jess would know about it. Her older girl went to kindergarten there last year. If Jess was looking for somewhere that felt safe and familiar, I felt something tighten across my ribs that wasn't physical. It was the recognition that we were now in a different kind of problem. Not survival, not resource management, not medical triage. This was the old problem. The problem that existed before the alert and would exist long after the compound dissipated. The problem of a man who believed his family belonged to him, driving through dark streets to find them. "We have to warn the school," I said. "The school is a Red Cross operation. They have protocols. Protocols assume phones work. Phones barely work." "Then we drive there. And say what? A man at our shelter is looking for his wife, and we think she might be at your shelter? They'll ask why that's our business. They'll ask what authority we have. They'll ask questions that have answers I can't prove, because the only evidence is the way a man's voice sounds when he's being patient." Dr. Shah looked at me with an expression I'd seen her use on animals in pain. Not pity, not detachment, but a focused, practical compassion that had already calculated the options and was waiting for the world to catch up. "Then we go to Jess," she said. "If she's there, we tell her. She decides." We drove to Meridian South Elementary at 9 a.m. The Red Cross shelter was smaller than the community center. Maybe 25 people, mostly families, organized in classrooms. The volunteer at the entrance was a retired teacher named Mrs. Gaines, who wore a lanyard with her Red Cross ID and the particular air of someone who had found in disaster the purpose that retirement had stolen. Jess Purcell was there. So were her girls, Lily and Margot. They were in a first-grade classroom with alphabet posters on the walls and small chairs pushed to the edges and sleeping bags arranged on the reading rug. Jess was thin, dark-haired, with the watchful stillness of someone who had spent years monitoring a room for shifts in mood. When she saw Dr. Shah, she recognized her immediately. The vet who'd splinted the kitten. "He's looking for you," Dr. Shah said. No preamble, no softening. "He's at the community center on 5th. He left at 4 this morning driving south. I think he knows." Jess absorbed this the way she probably absorbed everything Dale did. Quickly, completely, with a visible cataloging of exits and contingencies. "How long do I have?" "I don't know. Days, maybe less." "Can you stop him?" "From leaving the shelter? No. We don't have authority to detain anyone." Jess looked at her daughters, who were sitting cross-legged on the floor drawing with crayons that the Red Cross had provided. Lily, the older one, was drawing a house with a peaked roof and a chimney and a cat in every window. She was drawing a house that didn't exist in a world that currently didn't guarantee houses would continue to exist. And she was putting cats in the windows because she was 7 years old, and cats in windows was what she wanted. And my chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with organophosphate exposure. "I'll go to Hattiesburg," Jess said. "My sister's there." Hattiesburg was in the corridor too. It was hit. "I know. My sister's alive. She called 2 days ago when the phones came back. She started packing within the hour. Dr. Shah gave her the clinic's address in case she needed veterinary antibiotics. Doxycycline, amoxicillin, the medications that cross the species barrier and might be unavailable from human pharmacies for weeks. I gave her the 12 gallons of gas I'd been keeping in reserve cans in the bed of my truck. 12 gallons. Enough to reach Hattiesburg, and most of the way back if she needed to. Though I hoped the back part wouldn't be necessary. She loaded the girls into a minivan that belonged to another shelter resident who had offered it when Mrs. Gaines explained the situation in a voice quiet enough that only the adults could hear. Jess buckled Lily and Margot into their seats, and Margot dropped a crayon, and Jess picked it up and handed it back. And Lily said, "Are we going to Aunt Karen's?" And Jess said, "Yes, baby." And they pulled out of the school parking lot at 11:40 a.m., heading south on Highway 59 toward a city that had also been poisoned but contained a sister and a locked door and the particular safety of being expected. I never saw them again. I don't know if Dale found out we'd been there. I don't know if he eventually went to the school and found them gone. I don't know what he did after that. He stayed at the community center for another week, and then one morning, his cot was empty, and his truck was gone, and no one asked where he went because everyone understood, in the unspoken way that groups understand things they cannot safely discuss, that his absence was the point. Dr. Marchetti never said anything about it directly. But that evening, she added a line to her nightly briefing. "If anyone has information about a person at risk, from any source, for any reason, my door is always open, and I don't require evidence. I require concern." She looked at me when she said it. Just for a moment. Just long enough. I visit Frank every morning now. He can't manage the pill bottles himself. The tremor makes the child safety caps impossible, so I pre-sort his medications into a weekly organizer every Sunday. He makes coffee while I do it. His coffee is terrible. I drink it anyway. Dr. Shah reopened the clinic on day 41. The pharmaceutical storage was empty and took months to resupply. But the building was intact, and the animals of Lauderdale County did not pause their injuries and infections for the convenience of human crisis. Reuben was back at work on day 42. He brought his own coffee now. It was better than Frank's. Everything was better than Frank's. I never told anyone about the pharmacy gate, about leaving it open, about the gunshot I heard 4 blocks later. I carry that the way you carry a key to a room you'll never enter again. It's in your pocket. It has weight. It opens nothing. And you cannot bring yourself to throw it away. Dr. Marchetti left Meridian on day 50. She went to Hattiesburg, then Tuscaloosa, then Birmingham. Following the corridor, treating the exposed, training local medics in organophosphate protocols. Before she left, she gave Dr. Shah her remaining atropine injectors and a handshake that lasted longer than handshakes usually do. I watched from the parking lot. I watched a woman transfer her authority to another woman through a box of auto-injectors and 6 seconds of sustained grip. And I understood that this was how the world would rebuild, not through alerts on screens, but through one person handing another person what they needed and trusting them to use it. There are still days when I smell something sweet. Dr. Marchetti told me it might never fully stop. The olfactory nerve can retain damage patterns long after the cause is gone, playing back a sensation that no longer corresponds to anything in the air. A phantom, a memory my nose keeps having without my permission. When it happens, I stop whatever I'm doing. I go outside, I breathe, I count what I have. It's always enough. Last Thursday, I was checking a trap I'd set behind the Dollar General on Frontage Road. A feral queen I'd been tracking for 3 weeks, tortoiseshell, ears notched from old fights. And when I opened the trap, she looked at me with the specific fury that feral cats reserve for the precise moment they realize they cannot escape. Green eyes, flat ears, every tooth visible. I covered the trap with a towel. She went quiet. They always go quiet when you cover them, because they are wired to believe that what they cannot see them. And the darkness is a kind of mercy, even when it's a lie. I loaded her into the truck and drove her to Dr. Shah. And Dr. Shah sedated her and spayed her and cleaned her ears and gave her a rabies vaccine. And tomorrow, I'll release her back behind the Dollar General where her colony lives. And she will never know what I did or why. And that's fine. That's the whole job. You catch them, you help them, you let them go, and they never understand what happened. They just go on living. Dolores's photograph is still on my kitchen counter. Frank never took it back. I asked him about it once, and he said, "She liked your house. She would have liked you." He said it the way he says everything, as a fact, offered without expectation, carrying nothing that requires a response. I dust the frame every Sunday when I sort his pills. I don't know why. I do it anyway.